So we are here again every Thursday with Vicky and with a special guest to be talking about all things transitioning from humanitarian to non-humanitarian world and vice versa. And this time we've invited another special guest, Liz, who will be introducing and talking a lot about how her journey was. But maybe we start with the introduction and then we go to specific questions that Vicky and I will be asking on behalf of our audience. So, Liz, welcome to this session. Tell us a bit
Welcome,
about
Liz.
you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on. So my name is Liz Harris. I joined the International Committee of the Red Cross in 2002 as an Urdu interpreter. I worked in protection for around 4 years, different missions, mainly Kashmir, Afghanistan, and then I did some protection work in the UK on the Guantanamo file. I then moved to the recruitment side, where I was leading on the promotion of the International Red Cross as an employer from the UK. So I used to go around to lots of universities, give lots of talks, run workshops, seminars, and I specialized in particular with finding people with the languages that we needed to do the ICRC prison visits, which your viewers are probably aware of if they're in this field. So it was a great job, and I had a really interesting time in the ICRC. But I found myself after a few years in my London role, let's just say 5-6 years, I was getting a bit restless. And I imagine this is also, a situation a lot of people find themselves in, particularly if they're not doing field work. So I was now working as what we call in the ICSC resident staff. So I was no longer an expatriate overseas on missions. There's very little opportunity to grow and develop in terms of your career. Now, I wouldn't say that I'm the most, sort of hierarchical career orientated person, but I like a lot of change and a lot of stimulation and a lot of challenge. And I was just doing the same thing year in, year out. And I'd built something from scratch in London. So my role didn't exist before I took it on. So I'd really built something and I was proud of that. And I could see concretely the results I was bringing in. But after a few years of doing it, it's like, okay, so we've got to a situation now where, this is generating, recruits, good people, it's making an impact for the field. That's fantastic. Now what? I didn't find the organization was very supportive in terms of career development. I felt the attitude seemed to be a bit like, yeah, but you've got a good salary, you've got great working conditions, you work for the ICRC, what more could you want? I'm like, I applied for a few jobs in Geneva because that was the option was either go back to the field or shift to Geneva. I did apply for a couple of Geneva jobs. I didn't get anywhere. There's a lot of competition for them. Yeah. Even for jobs I was extremely well qualified for. And I didn't really want to move there anyway. That's the thing. I know if I'd have kept pushing, I would have got something. But, I was in my mid-40s and I thought this would probably be it. I'll end up spending the rest of my career, because it doesn't get any easier coming home, in terms of getting work and stuff. I thought I'll, probably just end up in Switzerland for the next 10 years. And it's an okay country, but my family, my friends, etc. here, and I kind of knew, as much as I still, to this day, I still have that nostalgia about the field. I wasn't ready to go back and do long missions. I wanted to be rooted here, and it took a while. It really, really took a while to get to this stage, because I was very attached to the organization. I think it kind of gets you like that.
Yeah. So maybe, Liz, sorry to interrupt, but maybe this is where we can start getting very specific. And Vicky, maybe you can start with some specific questions that everyone's interested in. Vicky.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So, Liz, it's very interesting to hear what you're saying, that you actually had to prioritize. You had to prioritize. No, you had to have your priorities straight. Like, I want to be back home. I want to be close to my family. and you
Yeah.
had to also know yourself. So
Yeah.
really, that taking time, this is sort of a self-discovery. Okay, I need this and these elements in my job. I need this, I need salary. It needs
Yeah.
to be home. It needs to be some challenge and some stimulation, right? And so where did this bring you? Knowing yourself and also knowing your priorities. Where did it bring you? What was your next step in this
Well,
on this
I
journey?
felt quite stuck because I also felt as if I'd ended up in a career lane that I didn't really intend to get into. My job was great, but the other options in a similar lane would all be sort of HR related, recruitment. I mean, an obvious next step would have been to move to one of the other, big charities or NGOs into the recruitment department. I'm just not really interested in that. I'm not really interested in them. I was an ICRC person. And I wasn't really interested massively in the rest of the field. And I didn't really want to move into hardcore HR. So that was quite hard. So I took advantage of the ICRC. They did start up, and they still have it, a career development service within the organization. I can't remember exactly what they call it now, but they had a coach. And that was really, really useful. And I got in there when they were like the person who'd set it up, who was like really well qualified. I had personal coaching sessions from her for about 5 or 6 sessions. And it was extremely useful because it helped me even to vocalize those things that I wanted and to take that next step. So what I'd been thinking about for ages was taking a period of unpaid leave where I could just breathe a bit, have the knowledge that, okay, the job is still there for me if I want to go back. But I just wanted to step away from the kind of treadmill and to have some thinking space. So that's what I managed to, but it still took quite a bit of courage to ask for it. And I still had to negotiate and, work out terms of that. My boss wasn't very happy with it at first. Anyway, we reached a compromise, and this actually resulted in, I was actually able on the back of this to negotiate a voluntary redundancy package. So they decided that they would basically put 2 jobs into one, mine and another job, while I was away, and like pilot it with somebody who really wanted to come back to the UK, and who was junior. And for her, it would have been like a big, a step up. And so it was just like win-win all round. And they said, if the pilot works, we could give you a severance package. I was like, yep. I mean, literally, I know some people are really upset by redundancy. I would just bit their hand off. So period, I got a payout. So that was really helpful.
So Liz, one of the things that I think many people have struggled with and maybe are struggling still is this point in life where they say, this is the time I make a decision and I move, right? This is a time, because you're saying beautifully about how ICRC was your identity, right? So you were the ICRC person.
100%.
And now not being the ICRC person is obviously a very big shift. So maybe you could tell about how was that process of where you've decided, okay, this is the time that I'm going to take the package. I will be stepping into another life that is no longer ICRC person. How does that look like? So how is that process?
Not all plain sailing, I'll be honest with you. And I think that is one point that I would say to anybody. So I literally made a note on this yesterday. If you take this step, be prepared that there will be things you miss. It's not going to be like in magazines unless you're really lucky. There's not going to be this perfect arc. You make your decision and then, oh, wow, I'm in the sunlit uplands, I'm sailing. It's like there will be ups and downs. I think what helped me is during that sabbatical, that period of unpaid leave, I was allowed to work. And I went out immediately, and I did a whole bunch of freelance things and consultancies. And that was really great to sort of realize, hey, there's a world out there. And there are really interesting people and really smart people out there who aren't in the ICSE. You don't have, there is a world out there, basically.
Yeah.
So that kind of helped. And then after I got the redundancy package, so that was in September of 2018, I did a second master's in writing. Now that's what I really wanted to do. So it wasn't on the same track. I wasn't moving, doing a MSc in HR management, but I was like, no, this is what I want to do. But how it was, I missed things I missed to be prepared for. I missed a lot of the friendships that were work linked, so that these people, they're still friends, but they start to drop off because you're just not seeing them every day or not on Messenger or whatever, with them all the time. And I'm a very sociable person. I really miss that. My international, I was always traveling a lot in my old job. I felt at times like my life had shrunk. I did feel that. And of course, that got even more so during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And, now I used to travel, I was probably flying like once a month, which is like horrendous for the environment. But now I haven't been overseas since, I think the last time was, Brussels in 2018. I no longer have, I had a bit of, I had a quite nice lifestyle. I used to go and talk at lots of events, get invited to the EU, the International Criminal Court. I do miss that stuff. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
So there are things that I miss. And there are things, as I say, don't ever think that there won't be things that you miss, and be prepared for that, I would say.
Absolutely.
It's still you develop, you will develop a new world, a new persona, not a new persona, but you know what I mean, you'll find new things to fit into.
I'm thank you for mentioning it. Because the part of what you mentioned is really the identity, the switch of identity, which really, from the many interviews that I've been doing with transitioning humanitarians, it's one of the most difficult things, really, to transition, to change the humanitarian identity, as you are mentioning, the one that we are so connected to our colleagues. And actually, there is scientific research on that it's really, really, the bond is extremely strong. And then once you leave this community, and you find yourself amongst people that are not humanitarians, that you feel really lonely, and you really have to struggle sort of to integrate again. So this is, I think, one of the learnings that is for transitioning humanitarians, to pay particular attention to communities, to your groups of friends. And we mentioned it already with Asal, I think already a few sessions ago, that really the groups of friends that you're surrounding with, because the dynamics of friendships whilst you are in humanitarian world and in the world outside is really, really very different. And really to join some community that is really close to you, that you feel that you are really close to, is really, really important. So here I want to ask you, Liz, so what was I also want to say that you went to areas that are so maybe unrelated, and maybe when you left the ICRC, you didn't know you would be going to these areas, right? I mean, you just you translated book that just got published, and also you went to health sector. So tell us a little bit about what was your thinking process?
These things are really linked. So the book that I translated it's called In the Shadow of Daesh. Dans la nuit de Daesh is the French version, well, the French original, I should say. I discovered that book back in, several years ago. Cut a long story short, I translated it from French to English. It's the story of a young French woman who's groomed by recruiters and goes to Islamic State with her 4-year-old, soon realizes that she's been duped, and incredibly manages to escape. I mean, incredibly lucky. And she wrote it. Actually, it's kind of all of this, because she wrote it to sort of unpick, to try and understand why she went, how she got kind of brainwashed, what they went to in her to what the triggers were. And she really goes into it. It's a very honest account. And also she wanted to warn other people against going. And I felt really strongly about this. I've worked in, as Vicky knows, prisons with in these kind of contexts. So anyway, without going too much into it, so that doing that though sort of linked me to my old world. So my publishers are kind of from that world, as it were, with books from conflict zones. Right now I'm doing the publicity, and it's great. It gives me an excuse to sort of reach out to all these people again, and it makes me feel like a bit sort of linked to that. The health stuff, I started working for the NHS when the pandemic struck. So March 2020, I literally just started doing some freelance work, training aid workers in safety and security. And I was thinking, okay, nice freelance gig. There seemed to be plenty of work. And I was still trying to work out what it was I was going to do. And then the pandemic came, lost all my work overnight, all my other freelance work gone as well. I mean, it was an awful time. But the humanitarian in me just wanted to dive in anyway. And so, yes, but in a very lowly clinical role as a healthcare assistant. So that's like it, for sake of your viewers, that's like a non-registered health professional. So somebody who's not a doctor, nurse, or pharmacist, but still works in the clinical environment doing clinical stuff. So I started doing that in a local hospital. But it was the most incredible experience, which I'm trying to write a book about now. So I still can't believe this. I worked in intensive care, like me. I don't even have a background in healthcare. Yeah, okay. Throughout the second wave, I was doing, also at the same time, I was doing the video calls between patients and families, which was very much like RFL.
Yeah.
Establishment of family links for non-ICRC people. But there were moments in this job that were pure ICRC. And there were times where I really saw the difference, because the NHS gets sort of painted as a quasi-humanitarian organisation, and it's really not, and it shouldn't be painted in this way. And there were times when I could really, really see the difference, but it was the sort of spirit of it was still there. And then I went into the vaccinations business, and that's sort of where I'm still working at the moment. So it was sort of different, but with a sort of a thread running through it, I would say. And I would never have had this incredible adventure if I'd stayed in my old job.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Quite, frustrating.
So, Liz, maybe one of the things that you could talk about is, as we're wrapping up as well, is like, what would you say that the person who's now considering this maybe could be a life that I want to go for, right? So there are other people who are doing it. Obviously, it's possible. I may also try. What would you say, I don't know, the top 3-4 things they could focus on, that they could start doing it now? And also what, like we talked about the alternative, right? So because I think oftentimes we feel like there are no alternatives. There's one aspect of it. And there's also the alternative of what happens if we don't do it? What are we missing out on if we actually don't transition, right? Like you were saying that you've also explored a different world that you haven't even considered was possible before. Yeah. So therefore, looking from different aspects of the alternative, so what would you say people could look at their own lives and then say, these are the things I could focus on, these are the things I could start doing or thinking about? Liz, what would you say, your advice?
I'm going to first address the second part of your question, which was about alternatives.
Yeah.
Because Vicky asked me to think about this, and my own reaction, I found my own reaction really interesting, because there's definitely been times where I think, gosh, slightly Riley, was that crazy to leave that job? Because, I earned a lot of money, and money is something, it's not nothing. But when Vicky put that question to me, my initial visceral reaction was like, there was no alternative. That was it. You know, there was no. I know that in my role, if I'd have stayed, because there was a new manager that came in, I would have probably been made redundant anyway, but not in such nice circumstances, because I know sort of a bit what happened to the team afterwards. Or I could be still clinging on in London, but quite miserable, very ground down, but, you know, fighting my corner. And so to me, there just wasn't an alternative. I had to do it. Right. In terms of what somebody can do now, I think if your organization does have any kind of careers help, like the ICRC does, take advantage of it. I think people are often, I knew this when I worked at universities. I would often tell this to students: go and speak to your career service. They're good. They know what they're doing. Really developed in the time, when I was at university, it wasn't that much. But there are professionals who can help you. I found an organization that works with career changers. I think it's called Career Changers or something like that. I went to one of their seminars. These sorts of things were helpful psychologically, and realizing that there's other people out there in the same boat, and they do sort of exercises with you. Practically, obviously, you need to work out what you can afford to do, what you can afford to do, and what your alternative sources of income can be. And that is something that you can start working on now, because only you know about your own finances, whether it, work out exactly, how much money do you really need? Do you have dependents? That's going to be harder. I don't, it's just little. So I think those are all kind of concrete steps. Talk to people, but also be careful. Because this is
a very good one.
This is why I would say talking to professionals, to career coaches like yourself, or people in your organization, who are actually coaches, is, I would really recommend it, because every single person you talk to will be talking back to you from their own viewpoint. I found that out because I'm actually an incredibly indecisive person. I'm not even, I might come across as like sort of brave. I'm not. I've been through masses of anxiety through this process. And one thing that I've tended to do throughout my life is ask everybody's opinion, which, you'll just get, you ask 10 or 15 different people, you'll just get 10 or 15 different answers. And most of those people, unless they are extremely self-aware and have any kind of psychological training, will just put themselves, their head on your shoulders, and answer their perspective. So be careful with that one. That's what I'd actually say, to be careful too. I think that's probably a few things.
That's a very, thank you very much. That's a very important one, that you differentiate it. Talk to some people, maybe as you coaches, or people who have done it, who have done this step, but people who have not done and don't know, they will project. They will want to give you the best in the best, in all the love.
I don't know, even people who have done it, they will still be coming at you with their story. Do you know what I mean? Which is why if you speak to an impartial person who's trained, they will draw that answer out of you yourself, which is what you guys do. There was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. So maybe ask me something.
Okay. Vicky, you wanted to say something?
No, Asel, go ahead, please.
Okay. So then, Liz, you've shared so much wisdom from this. And I think one thing, before I forget as well, is one thing that I was thinking is that, whenever we find ourselves wanting to ask all these opinions from other people, is essentially meaning that we are afraid of making a decision, right? So whenever we're afraid of making decision, asking more people is not going to help much either. Like for the
No.
reasons that you guys said, and those are good reasons. So that's why whenever we're afraid, what we can do best is just sit with it instead of just trying to, react to it and then start gathering all this data and then get overwhelmed about it and then like, oh no, everyone's saying this and what do I really want, right? So that's why if you are experiencing this, it's normal, it's supposed to happen. Liz was talking about anxiety. I think we experience in so many different ways of emotions, and the best we can do is instead of keep reacting to it, just stay with it. And I know that this is something that's not easy to do for any of us, but if you can, you do that. If not, of course, approach professionals like Liz was saying, either a coach or therapist or whoever you have in the vicinity and get help, and that will help you a lot more than you surveying other people. So I think that's very
100%.
important to say that.
Really, really is. Yeah, I would say
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah, let's go ahead.
No, that's probably everything. I suppose I was going to say another like slightly boring, more concrete thing, which is, at work you could look into, for example, trying to cut down to part-time, that sort of thing. And I think sometimes we can end up not wanting to even ask, maybe feeling a bit intimidated by our bosses, by our management. Try and break through that. Try and break through that and sort of make your demands, make your ask, find out what is possible. Because I think when I was in my old job, I just used to fantasize about throwing it all up, taking the big leap, and I did that, although I did have the parachute of, reasonable amount of money. But that was sort of my fantasy. And I remember a friend of mine saying, well, could you do 3 days a week instead? And at the time I was like, no, because she was seeing from her perspective. Now I look back and I think, yeah, that wouldn't have been so bad. But, I'm still, don't get me wrong, I'm still pleased, from what I've done. But yeah, anyway, there's just my thoughts.
So maybe just to wrap up, a lot of the things that Liz you've told us, I think Vicky and I can also relate to them, right? So what we can say to the listeners is there will be a bumpy ride afterwards as well, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be there if you stay in where you are, right? So we often think that oh my God, it's going to be worse than what I have here because what I have here, I know at least, but that's not the case. There will be other challenges as you go to a new journey. So be prepared for that. You will be missing things. There will be things you will regret as well. So be prepared for that as well. And there will be also amazing things that you will discover that you didn't know that existed, maybe up until now. So you can be prepared for that as well. And finances are important topics to think about. So Liz, thank you for mentioning that. I think we talk about it almost in every session. And everyone needs to make the decisions ahead of time so that we have a parachute to jump onto. And there's always a way to come back if you want to, but maybe for some people it's not an option. They don't want to consider it, right? So that's why you need to think of all of these things. And maybe those are better than keep surveying people or keep getting other people's opinions, which in the end, I mean, you need to really feel if it's right for you. You need to believe that this is what you want to do. And if you think you do, then go for it. So with that, thank you all so much, Liz, especially you for this journey that you talked about in an honest way, in the way that you've experienced it. And I think this is what we want to promote, right? We want to promote people's honest accounts of how things are, what are the challenges they face, what are the ways they are overcoming them, how are they overcoming them. And those are very important things to talk about so that we can make transitioning more predictable, less fearful, and less of this darker, road to go, but more like a transparent road to go that we can all share and support each other. Vicky, you would like to say anything?
Only thank you, Asel, because you summarized it wonderfully. And of course, first of all, thank you, Liz, for really sharing your story with us. I mean, it's really inspirational, and there is great wisdom, as Asel mentioned. So thank you for sharing. And I really want to wish you all the best in your future, and like professional and private, and loads of new amazing discoveries and work and challenges which you need for work, and amazing people, of course. So really, thank you, and best of luck.
Thank you. Thanks, Vicky. It's been lovely to see you again. Lovely to meet you, Asel. Viewers, if you want to connect to me on LinkedIn and ask any questions, I'm Liz Harris. It hasn't come up on the thing I just put, Liz. I'm a connection of Vicky's. I'll link to you as well. But yeah, I'm always happy to chat about this stuff. Okay.
Amazing.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Thank you.